I thought we were about to say, "I do." I had no idea that in less than an hour my fiancé would shove me down a marble staircase in front of 200 guests, shattering not just my ankle, but every illusion I'd ever held about the man I was about to marry. The impact wasn't just physical. As I lay crumpled at the bottom of those stairs, my white dress pooling around me like spilled milk, I watched him standing at the top, not rushing down to help, not calling for an ambulance, but turning to his mother with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, cold calculation. That's when I understood. This wasn't an accident. This was something far worse. 6 months earlier, everything had been perfect, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I was standing in our kitchen, my kitchen technically, since the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights had been my grandmother's gift to me on my 25th birthday, watching the morning light filter through the sheer curtains I'd hung just last week. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar song, and I could hear Michael in the shower upstairs, humming something off-key, probably that Bruno Mars song he'd been obsessed with lately. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend Rachel asking about the final dress fitting. I smiled, typing back something light about bridesmaid dresses and roses. The truth was, I wasn't freaking out. I was calm, eerily calm maybe. Michael and I had been together for 3 years, long enough to know each other's rhythms, short enough that everything still felt fresh. We'd met at a charity gala for underprivileged youth programs. I was there representing my family's foundation, the one my grandmother had established decades ago, and he was there with his mother, Patricia, who sat on the board. He'd approached me by the champagne table, made some self-deprecating joke about his inability to tie a bow tie properly, and we'd talked for 2 hours straight. By the end of the night, I knew 3 things. He was charming, he was attentive, and his mother watched him like a hawk watches a field mouse. That last detail should have been a warning, but I was 24, optimistic, and completely unprepared for what Patricia Whitmore was capable of. Michael stepped into the kitchen, his hair still damp, wearing that gray sweater I loved on him, the one that made his eyes look almost silver in certain light. He kissed the top of my head, a gesture so casual and familiar it made my chest warm. This is what love looks like, I thought. This quiet morning domesticity, the shared space, the easy silence. He poured himself coffee, black with 1 sugar, exactly the way he'd been drinking it since I met him. I handed him the newspaper I'd already finished reading, already folded to the business section he preferred. These little rituals, these tiny acts of knowing each other, they felt like the foundation of something solid. His mother called while we were finishing breakfast. I could hear her voice through the phone, that particular cadence she used when she wanted something. Bright, slightly breathless, with an undertone of steel. Michael's expression shifted subtly, his shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. "Just give me 1 second," he mouthed to me, stepping out onto the small balcony that overlooked our tiny garden. I watched him through the glass door, the way his free hand ran through his hair, the way he nodded even though she couldn't see him. When he came back inside, his smile was back in place, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "My mom wants to meet for lunch today," he said. "She has some ideas about the seating chart." I felt that familiar twinge of irritation. The wedding was in 6 months, and Patricia had opinions about everything. The flowers, too traditional. The venue, too modern. The guest list, too exclusive or not exclusive enough depending on her mood that day. But I swallowed my frustration and smiled. "Sure," I said. "Should I come too?" His hesitation was brief, but I caught it. "Maybe just me this time," he said. "You know how she gets when there are too many voices. She just wants to feel involved." That should have been red flag number 1. The fact that my own wedding planning had become a negotiation between Michael and his mother, with me increasingly sidelined. But I told myself it was temporary. Once we were married, once Patricia saw that Michael was happy, she'd back off. She'd have to. I spent that afternoon at the final dress fitting with Rachel, who'd flown in from Seattle specifically for this. The boutique smelled like lavender and new fabric, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. The consultant, an elegant woman named Dominique, helped me into the gown I'd chosen 3 months ago. It was simple, elegant, with a silk bodice and a skirt that flowed like water. No beading, no excessive lace, just clean lines and perfect tailoring. I looked at myself in the three-way mirror, and for a moment I felt like a bride, like someone about to step into a new chapter of her life with confidence and joy. "You look absolutely stunning," Rachel said from the velvet chair behind me. She was holding a glass of the complimentary champagne they served, her eyes a little misty. "Michael's going to lose his mind when he sees you." I smiled, but something felt off, a tightness in my chest that I couldn't quite name. "Do you think his mom will like it?" I asked, and immediately hated myself for asking. Rachel's expression darkened. "Who cares what Patricia thinks? This is your wedding, Sarah. Yours and Michael's, not hers." "I know," I said. "You're right. I know." But even as I said it, I was thinking about the phone call that morning, about the lunch I wasn't invited to, about all the little moments over the past year where Michael had chosen his mother's comfort over mine. Dominique pinned a small adjustment at the waist, her practiced hands working quickly. "Your fiancé is a lucky man," she said warmly. I wanted to believe her. Michael came home late that night. I was already in bed, reading a novel I'd been trying to finish for weeks, when I heard his key in the lock. He climbed the stairs slowly, his footsteps heavy on the old wood. When he appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, he looked exhausted. "How was lunch?" I asked, setting my book aside. "Fine," he said. "Good. She's excited about the wedding. Did she approve the seating chart?" He loosened his tie, not quite meeting my eyes. We didn't really get to it. She wanted to talk about other things. "What other things?" "Family stuff," he said vaguely. "You know how she is. She worries." I wanted to push, to ask what exactly his mother was worried about, but something in his posture told me to let it go. So I did. I pulled back the covers on his side of the bed and waited for him to join me. When he finally did, he kissed me goodnight, but there was a distance in it, a formality I hadn't felt before. I told myself I was imagining things. The weeks that followed brought more small disturbances, little tremors that I dismissed as pre-wedding jitters. Patricia started calling more frequently, sometimes twice a day. Michael would step out of rooms to take her calls, his voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite hear. When I asked what they talked about, he'd give me the same vague answers. Wedding stuff, family things, nothing important. But if it was nothing important, why the secrecy? Why the closed doors and hushed tones? I tried talking to Rachel about it. We were having coffee at our favorite cafe in Park Slope, the one with the mismatched furniture and the barista who knew our orders by heart. She listened as I explained the situation, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Sarah," she said carefully, "I'm going to say something, and I need you to really hear me. Okay?" "Okay," I said, though my stomach was already tightening. This doesn't sound normal. The amount of influence Patricia has over Michael, the way he prioritizes her feelings over yours, the secrecy. These are serious red flags. I stirred my latte, watching the foam swirl. "I know it looks bad," I said, "but you don't know the whole story. His dad died when Michael was young. Patricia raised him alone. They're close. That's not a bad thing." "There's close," Rachel said, "and then there's enmeshed. This sounds like the latter." I wanted to argue, to defend Michael and our relationship, but deep down, something in Rachel's words resonated. I thought about my grandmother, who'd raised me after my own parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She'd been loving, supportive, present, but she'd also encouraged my independence. She'd wanted me to build my own life, make my own choices, even when those choices scared her. Patricia's approach to motherhood seemed different. She didn't want to guide Michael toward independence. She wanted to keep him tethered, but saying that out loud felt like a betrayal, so I kept quiet. The conversation moved on to safer topics, wedding flowers and honeymoon plans, but Rachel's words stayed with me, a seed of doubt taking root. 2 months before the wedding, I found the first real evidence that something was wrong. I was looking for my laptop charger, which I thought I'd left in Michael's home office, the small room at the back of the brownstone that he used for work. His door was usually closed, a boundary I respected, but he was out meeting a client and I needed my charger. I knocked out of habit, then pushed the door open. The office was neat, organized, very Michael. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall filled with legal texts and framed photos. His desk sat beneath the window, papers arranged in careful stacks. I spotted my charger plugged in near his desk lamp and crossed the room to retrieve it. That's when I saw the folder. It was lying half-hidden beneath a stack of contracts, a plain manila folder with no label. I wouldn't have thought twice about it except for one detail. My grandmother's name was written in blue pen across the tab, Eleanor Catherine Bennett. My hand moved almost of its own accord, pulling the folder free. Inside were documents, legal documents. I'm not a lawyer, but I recognized enough of the terminology to understand what I was looking at. Property deeds, transfer agreements, estate documentation, all related to the brownstone, my brownstone, the home my grandmother had given me. My heart started hammering against my ribs as I flipped through the pages. There were notes in the margins in handwriting I didn't recognize. Elegant, flowing script that definitely wasn't Michael's blocky print. Questions about ownership transfer timelines, calculations about property value, a highlighted section about marital property laws in New York State. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across Michael's desk. I stood there, my legs suddenly unsteady, trying to process what I'd just seen. Why would Michael have documents about my property? Why would someone be making notes about ownership transfer and marital law? The answer came to me slowly, horribly, like ice water filling my lungs. Patricia. This had Patricia written all over it. I thought about all those private phone calls, all those lunches I wasn't invited to, all the times Michael had deflected my questions. They'd been planning something. Planning to do what, exactly? Take my house? Transfer ownership? The full picture wasn't clear yet, but the outline was sharp enough to cut. I heard the front door open downstairs. Michael's voice calling my name, warm and casual, like everything was normal, like he hadn't been keeping a folder of legal documents about my inheritance hidden in his office. I quickly gathered the scattered papers, shoved them back into the folder, and placed it exactly where I'd found it. My hands were shaking. Sarah? Where are you? Michael's footsteps on the stairs. I grabbed my charger and stepped out of his office just as he reached the landing. Found it, I said, holding up the charger. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too bright, too forced. He smiled, but I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. A question, maybe, or suspicion. Was everything okay in there? He asked. Fine, I said. Just grabbed what I needed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Michael, listening to his steady breathing, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he was organizing my grandmother's estate documents as a favor. Maybe the notes weren't what they seemed. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew I was lying. There was nothing innocent about hiding those documents. Nothing innocent about the secrecy. I waited until Michael left for work the next morning. Then I called my grandmother's estate attorney, a man named Robert Chen who'd handled all her affairs for decades. Mr. Chen's office was in Midtown, one of those old buildings with marble lobbies and brass elevators that creaked when they moved. His secretary showed me into a wood-paneled conference room and brought me water I was too nervous to drink. When Robert finally appeared, he looked concerned. "Sarah," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "It's good to see you, though I'm sensing this isn't a social call. I got right to the point. I need to know about the brownstone, the deed, the ownership structure, everything. Has anyone contacted you about it recently? Anyone asking questions about transfer of ownership or marital property law?" Robert's expression shifted, became guarded. "Why do you ask?" "Because I found documents," I said, "in my fiancé's office. Documents with my grandmother's name on them, legal papers about the brownstone, and I need to know if that's normal or if I should be worried." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Finally, he spoke. "3 weeks ago, I received a call from a woman identifying herself as Patricia Whitmore. She said she was your future mother-in-law and had some questions about your grandmother's estate. Specifically, she wanted to know about the brownstone and whether it would become marital property upon your marriage." The room tilted slightly. "What did you tell her?" "I told her," Robert said firmly, "that I couldn't discuss my client's private affairs with third parties. I told her that any questions about your property should come from you directly." She was persistent. She suggested that as your fiancé's mother, she had a right to certain information. I disagreed. She called back twice more. I didn't return those calls. My throat was tight. Did she mention Michael? Was he involved in these calls? "Not directly," Robert said. "But Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you." The questions she was asking, they weren't casual. She wanted very specific information about ownership structure, about what happens to property acquired before marriage, about whether certain types of transfers could be contested. These were questions someone asks when they're planning something. I felt sick. Planning what exactly? Robert leaned forward, his expression grave. "I can't say for certain without knowing their full intentions, but if I had to guess based on the nature of her inquiries, I'd say she's looking for ways to either gain access to the property or ensure it becomes jointly owned once you're married. In New York, property owned before marriage typically remains separate property unless it's specifically transferred or commingled, but there are ways around that if someone is determined enough." I left Robert's office in a daze. The city moved around me, people rushing past on their way to lunch meetings and appointments, completely unaware that my entire world had just fractured. I walked for blocks without any destination, my mind trying to organize the pieces of this puzzle. Patricia had called my attorney multiple times, asking questions about my property, questions specific enough to suggest she had plans. And Michael had hidden documents about the brownstone in his office, documents with notes that weren't in his handwriting. The conclusion was inescapable. They were working together. My fiancé and his mother were conspiring to take my home. The home my grandmother had loved, had filled with memories, had entrusted to me with the belief that I would cherish it. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, that I couldn't fully process it. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Dinner tonight? Thinking we could try that new Italian place you mentioned." The casual normalcy of it made me want to scream. How could he text about dinner when he was plotting with his mother to steal from me? But I forced myself to breathe, to think strategically. I needed more information before confronting him. I needed to understand the full scope of what they were planning. So I texted back, "Sounds perfect. See you at 7. That dinner was one of the strangest experiences of my life. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window, candles flickering between us, and played at normalcy. Michael talked about his day, a difficult client, a funny interaction with his paralegal. I smiled and nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while studying his face for signs of deception. How could he sit there, looking so open and genuine, while hiding something so enormous? The pasta I ordered tasted like cardboard. Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "You seem distracted," he said. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just thinking about wedding stuff. So much to organize." He squeezed my hand. "I know it's overwhelming, but we're almost there. Just a couple more months and it'll all be perfect." Perfect. The word hung in the air like a taunt. I wanted to pull my hand away to demand answers, to ask him point blank what he and his mother were planning. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the tiny, desperate hope that I was wrong, that there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A growing sense that if I was going to confront this, I needed to do it right. I needed leverage. I needed proof. Over the next several weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked. The times Michael's phone would light up with calls from his mother that he'd ignore until he could step away. The way he'd close his laptop quickly when I entered the room. The stack of mail he kept in his office that he'd shuffle through privately before bringing me anything addressed to both of us. I didn't snoop exactly, but I became watchful, alert, and what I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Michael and Patricia were in constant communication. They met for lunch at least twice a week, meetings he'd mention casually, if at all. He started working late more frequently, except when I called his office. His assistant would say he'd left hours ago. Where was he during those unaccounted hours? I had a pretty good guess. I also started documenting everything. Every time Patricia called and Michael stepped away. Every mysterious meeting. Every time I caught him in a small lie about his whereabouts. I kept a detailed log in a password-protected file on my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with this information, but some instinct told me I'd need it. Rachel noticed the change in me. We were having our weekly coffee, and she set down her cup with a concerned expression. "You look exhausted," she said, "and you've lost weight. Are you sleeping?" "Not much," I admitted. "Rachel, I found something bad," and I told her everything. About the folder in Michael's office, about Patricia's calls to my attorney, about the constant secret communication between mother and son. Rachel's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, and finally, a fierce protectiveness. "You need to call off the wedding," she said immediately. "Sarah, this man is planning to steal your house with his mother. That's not just a red flag, that's a relationship-ending betrayal." "I know," I said quietly. "I know I should. But Rachel, I need to understand why. Why would he do this? Does he even love me? Or was this always about the property? Was our entire relationship a lie?" "Those are questions you may never get good answers to," Rachel said gently, "and you might have to make peace with that. But you can't marry him. You know that, right?" I nodded, but inside I was torn. Part of me wanted to confront Michael immediately, to demand the truth and end things. But another part, the part that had loved him for 3 years, wanted to give him a chance to explain, wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, some context I was missing. That part was stupid, I knew, naive. But it was also human. It's hard to let go of someone you love, even when they've shown you exactly who they are. So I made a decision. I would go through with the wedding preparations, act normal, and wait for them to make their move. Whatever they were planning, it would have to happen soon. And when it did, I'd be ready. I contacted Robert Chen again and asked him to prepare documentation that would protect my property no matter what. He drew up a prenuptial agreement, ironclad and comprehensive, that kept all my premarital assets completely separate. He also quietly transferred the brownstone deed into a trust with me as the sole beneficiary, making it even more difficult for anyone to claim ownership. "I should have done these things from the start," Robert said as I signed the papers. "Your grandmother would have wanted you protected." I signed my name, and with each stroke of the pen, I felt something shift inside me. I was taking control. I was protecting myself. And I was preparing for war. 6 weeks before the wedding, Patricia made her move. Michael and I were at his mother's house in Scarsdale for Sunday dinner, a ritual she'd insisted on once we got engaged. The house was exactly what you'd expect from old money, tasteful, expensive, and somehow cold, despite the expensive artwork and fresh flowers in every room. We just finished dessert when Patricia set down her coffee cup with a delicate clink and smiled at both of us. "There's something I'd like to discuss," she said. "Now that the wedding is so close, I think it's time we talked about practical matters." "What kind of practical matters?" I asked, though I already knew. My stomach was tight with anticipation. "Well," Patricia said, her smile widening, "I've been thinking about your living situation. That brownstone in Brooklyn Heights is lovely, Sarah, but it's quite large for a young couple. And frankly, the neighborhood is becoming rather commercial." Michael shifted beside me, and I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Where is this going, Patricia?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "I have a proposal," she said, reaching for a folder on the sideboard behind her. I couldn't help but notice it was the same type of manila folder I'd found in Michael's office. I think it would be wise, for everyone's benefit, to sell the brownstone and use the proceeds to purchase something more suitable. Something in a better location, perhaps closer to Michael's work. We could help with the search, of course. Make it a family project. The audacity of it took my breath away. Sell my grandmother's house. The house that had been in my family for generations. The house filled with her memories, her love, her legacy. And Patricia presented this as a casual suggestion, as if she were recommending a restaurant for dinner. "Michael," I said slowly, "did you know your mother was going to suggest this?" He finally looked at me, and I saw guilt flash across his features before he could mask it. "We've discussed it," he admitted, "just as a possibility." "A possibility," I repeated. "You discussed selling my house as a possibility, and you didn't think to mention this to me?" "Sarah," he started, but Patricia cut him off. "Darling, there's no need to be defensive," she said to me. "This is simply a practical conversation about your future. Once you're married, that house becomes a shared asset. It's only logical that both families have input on such major decisions." "That house will never be a shared asset," I said, and I heard the steel in my own voice. "It's mine. My grandmother left it to me, and I'm not selling it." Patricia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "I think you're being rather short-sighted," she said, "and selfish, if I'm honest. Michael is becoming your husband. What's yours becomes his, and what's his becomes yours. That's how marriage works." "Actually," I said, "that's not how it works legally. Property acquired before marriage remains separate property unless explicitly transferred. I've checked with my attorney. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's smile finally faded. "You've been speaking to attorneys about this? Behind our backs?" "Not behind anyone's back," I said, "protecting my interests openly, which is apparently more than I can say for you and Michael." Michael looked stricken. "Sarah, please," he said. "This isn't what you think." "Then what is it, Michael?" I asked, turning to face him fully. "Explain to me what I found in your office. Explain the folder with my grandmother's name on it. Explain the notes about property transfer and marital law in handwriting that looks suspiciously like your mother's. Explain why your mother called my estate attorney 3 times asking invasive questions about my property. Explain all of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face had gone pale, and he looked between me and his mother like a trapped animal. Patricia recovered first. "I can explain," she said crisply. "I was trying to protect my son. You waltz into his life with your family money and your inheritance. And yes, I wanted to make sure he'd be taken care of. That if this marriage doesn't work out, he won't be left with nothing. So you decided to plan how to take my house," I said. "That's your idea of protection? Making sure your son can steal from me if things go south?" "I wouldn't call it stealing," Patricia said. "I'd call it ensuring fair division of assets." "But it's not a shared asset," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's mine. It was given to me. And the fact that you two were scheming about it behind my back, planning how to get your hands on it, that's betrayal. That's exactly what it is." Michael finally found his voice. "I never wanted to take anything from you," he said. "I swear, Sarah. I was just... My mom was worried, and she convinced me we should understand the legal situation. That's all it was. Just understanding." "That's all?" I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the photo I'd taken of the folder contents before I returned them to his desk. "Then why did you hide these? Why all the secret meetings and phone calls? Why didn't you just ask me if you had questions about my property?" The answer crashed over me before he could respond. Because he knew. He knew that any conversation about my grandmother's house would raise alarm bells. He knew I'd never agree to sell it, to transfer it, to treat it as anything other than what it was. My inheritance, my home, my choice. So he and Patricia had gone around me, gathering information, building a case, preparing to pressure me after the wedding when I'd be legally vulnerable. The betrayal was complete. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm leaving," I said. "And Michael, I think you should stay here with your mother tonight. Think about whether you want to be married to me or to her, because you can't have both." I walked out of that house with my head high, but the moment I got into my car, I broke down. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my chest. 3 years. 3 years of building a life with someone, of trusting them, of planning a future, and it had all been built on sand. I drove back to the brownstone, my brownstone, and sat in the dark living room where my grandmother used to read to me when I was a child. I could almost hear her voice, steady and wise. "Never let anyone make you small, Sarah. Never give away your power. You're stronger than you know." The next morning, I called Rachel. "I need help," I said. "I need to end this engagement, but I need to do it smart. I need to protect myself legally, financially, and emotionally. And I think I need to understand exactly what Michael and Patricia were planning before I walk away." Rachel flew back to New York that afternoon. Together, we strategized. I would continue pretending everything was fine while quietly preparing to end the engagement. I'd document any further attempts by Patricia or Michael to pressure me about the brownstone. I'd make sure all my assets were protected, all my legal bases covered. And then, when the time was right, I'd confront them both with everything I knew. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Robert Chen. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with anger, "I need to see you immediately. Patricia Whitmore just filed paperwork claiming she has power of attorney over your grandmother's estate. She's trying to contest the brownstone deed." My blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "False ones," Robert said. "She's claiming your grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she transferred the property to you. She's produced a letter allegedly from Eleanor expressing concerns about your mental stability and requesting Patricia's oversight of the estate. It's complete fabrication, obviously. Your grandmother's medical records and the witnesses to the deed transfer prove she was perfectly lucid. But this is a serious legal challenge. It could tie up the property for months, maybe years." "She forged a letter from my dead grandmother," I said, barely able to process the words. "She actually forged documents to try to steal my house." That's when something inside me snapped. Not the hot, explosive anger I'd felt at dinner. This was something colder, harder, more dangerous. I'd been willing to end the engagement quietly, to walk away and rebuild. But now Patricia had crossed a line into criminal territory, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Over the next 4 weeks, I assembled my case. Robert Chen connected me with a forensic document examiner who confirmed the letter was a forgery. We pulled my grandmother's medical records, her psychiatric evaluations from her final months, proving she'd been completely competent. We gathered sworn statements from the witnesses to the deed transfer, from her doctors, from everyone who could testify to her state of mind. I also hired a private investigator, a decision Rachel fully supported. If Patricia was willing to forge documents, what else had she done? What other schemes was she running? The investigator's report came back 2 weeks before the wedding. It was damning. Patricia had a history of this kind of behavior. She'd tried something similar with her first husband's estate after his death, attempting to contest the will that left most of his money to his children from a previous marriage. She'd lost that case, but walked away with enough settlement money to maintain her lifestyle. She'd also been involved in 2 other property disputes with family members, both settled out of court. This wasn't opportunistic greed. This was a pattern, a practiced method of operation. And Michael, my Michael, had watched his mother do this to others and said nothing, had learned from her example, had become complicit in her schemes. The investigator also uncovered something else. Michael had taken out a significant loan 6 months ago, just after we'd gotten engaged, $200,000. The loan application listed the brownstone as collateral, using a forged document claiming he had ownership interest. The loan had been rejected because the bank's title search revealed he had no legal claim to the property, but the attempt itself was fraud. He'd tried to borrow money against my house, against property that wasn't his, using forged documents. The evidence was overwhelming. Michael wasn't just complicit in his mother's schemes, he was an active participant, and I had almost married him. I sat in my grandmother's favorite chair. The investigator's report spread across my lap and made my decision. I wasn't going to quietly end the engagement. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this with their reputations intact, free to try this again with someone else. I was going to expose them, publicly, completely, irrevocably, and I was going to do it at the wedding. Rachel thought I was crazy when I told her the plan. "Sarah," she said, "you can't go through with the wedding just to humiliate them. Cancel it, call the police, let the legal system handle this." I shook my head. The legal system will handle it. I'm filing charges for forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. But I want everyone who knows them to see exactly who they are. Every family member who enabled Patricia, every friend who looked the other way, every person who might have been her next victim, they need to know. The day of the wedding arrived. I got ready at the brownstone, surrounded by Rachel and 2 other bridesmaids who knew nothing about what was coming. I put on the dress that had seemed so perfect months ago. I did my hair, my makeup, everything exactly as planned. In the mirror, I looked like a bride, but I felt like a warrior. The venue was the Foundry in Long Island City, a beautiful industrial space with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. 200 guests had arrived, filling the white chairs arranged for the ceremony. The string quartet played softly as people found their seats. I could see Patricia in the front row, wearing a cream dress that she'd insisted wasn't too close to white, a subtle violation of wedding etiquette that I now understood was intentional. She wanted to be seen as equal to me, as important as the bride. Michael stood at the altar with his best man, looking nervous but handsome in his tuxedo. From where I waited behind the closed doors at the back of the venue, I could see him checking his watch, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was anxious. Did he know what was coming? Did he suspect? The music changed. The bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle. Rachel went last, and as she passed me, she squeezed my hand. "You sure about this?" she whispered. I nodded. The wedding march began. The doors opened. 200 people stood and turned to face me. I walked down that aisle alone. I'd refused Michael's suggestion that his uncle walk me down since I had no father. "This is my walk," I'd told him. "I do it by myself." Now I understood why I'd insisted. This wasn't about tradition or sentimentality. This was about making them all watch as I approached, as I came to claim what was mine. Not a marriage, not a partnership with a man who'd betrayed me, but justice. The aisle seemed impossibly long and somehow too short. Each step brought me closer to Michael, whose expression shifted from nervousness to something like relief as I approached. He thought I was really going through with it. He thought he'd gotten away with it. I reached the altar. The officiant, a friend of Patricia's, began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah Catherine Bennett and Michael James Whitmore in holy matrimony." I let him get through the opening remarks. Let him talk about love and commitment and the sacred bonds of marriage. Let everyone settle into the comfortable rhythm of a wedding ceremony. Then, just as he was about to ask if anyone objected to the union, I spoke. "I do," I said clearly. "I object." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. The officiant blinked at me. "I'm sorry?" "I object to this marriage," I repeated, louder now, "because the man standing next to me isn't who any of you think he is, and his mother, sitting right there in the front row, is a criminal." The murmur became gasps. Patricia shot to her feet. "How dare you?" she began, but I cut her off. 6 weeks ago, I said, still addressing the crowd, Patricia Whitmore filed forged documents attempting to steal my home. She created a fake letter claiming to be from my deceased grandmother, a letter stating that my grandmother wanted Patricia to have control over my inheritance because I was mentally unstable. Every word of it was a lie. I pulled the folder from where Rachel had hidden it beneath the altar's flower arrangement. I have the forensic analysis right here. The handwriting doesn't match my grandmother's. The paper is dated after her death, and the medical records prove my grandmother was completely competent when she gave me that house. I turned to Michael. "And you," I said, my voice shaking not with fear but with fury. "You tried to take out a loan against my property using forged ownership documents, $200,000. The bank rejected it because you don't own my house and never will. But the attempt itself is fraud. You forged documents, just like your mother." The crowd was in chaos now. People were standing, talking over each other, looking between me and Michael and Patricia, with expressions ranging from shock to horror to vindication. I noticed several of Patricia's relatives looked less surprised than they should have been. They'd known. They'd seen her do this before. Michael's face had gone ashen. "Sarah, please," he said, reaching for my hand. I jerked away from him. "Don't touch me," I said. "You don't get to touch me ever again. Did you ever love me, Michael? Or was I always just a mark? Just a woman with property your mother wanted?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out, and that was answer enough. Patricia tried a different approach. Tears appeared in her eyes as if by magic. "This is absurd," she said, her voice quavering. "Sarah, darling, you're clearly under tremendous stress. Wedding day jitters have made you paranoid. There are no forged documents. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." I pulled out my phone and projected the investigator's report onto the venue's screen, where everyone could see it. The screen lit up with documentation of Patricia's past lawsuits, her previous attempts to contest wills and steal property from relatives. It showed the timeline of her calls to my attorney, the forged letter, the forensic analysis proving it was fake. It showed Michael's loan application with the forged ownership documents. Every lie, every scheme, every manipulation laid bare in bullet points and legal language and undeniable proof. That's when Patricia's facade cracked completely. "You ungrateful little bitch," she hissed, all traces of tears and vulnerability gone. "That house should have been ours. My son deserves better than your grandmother's charity case leftovers. He deserves real wealth, real status, not some crumbling brownstone in a gentrifying neighborhood. So you admit it," I said. "You admit you were trying to steal my property." Patricia seemed to realize her mistake, but it was too late. She'd confessed in front of 200 witnesses. Several people had their phones out recording. This was going to be all over social media within the hour. I turned to the crowd one final time. "I'm pressing charges," I said, "for forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. My attorney has already filed the necessary paperwork. The police are on their way, and I'm breaking off this engagement, obviously. To anyone here who knew about their plans and said nothing, you're complicit. To anyone who might have been their next target, consider this a warning." Then I did something I'd been fantasizing about for weeks. I took off my engagement ring, that beautiful vintage emerald that Michael had presented as a family heirloom, and I hurled it at his feet. It bounced once on the polished concrete and skittered away under a chair. "Keep it," I said. "It's probably fake anyway, just like everything else about you." I started to walk back down the aisle, my head high, my dress trailing behind me like a victory banner. That's when Michael snapped. He'd been standing frozen throughout my entire speech, but something in my final dismissal triggered him. He lunged after me, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You're ruining everything. We can fix this. We can work it out." "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. But his grip tightened, his fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to bruise. "Michael, you're hurting me." Several groomsmen started moving toward us, finally realizing they should intervene. But Michael wasn't done. He pulled me backwards, trying to stop me from leaving, and I stumbled in my heels. We were at the top of the venue's grand staircase, the dramatic marble steps that led down to the reception area. The same staircase we'd planned to descend together after the ceremony for our big entrance as husband and wife. I tripped, my heel catching in the hem of my dress. For a moment, I teetered on the edge of the top step, my arms windmilling for balance. And that's when Michael, in a moment of rage or panic or perhaps just pure spite, shoved me. The world went into slow motion. I felt his hands against my shoulder blades, felt the pressure, felt myself falling forward into empty air. The stairs rushed up to meet me. I heard screams, including my own. My body tumbled down the marble steps, each impact a separate explosion of pain. My head cracked against stone. My ankle twisted with a sickening snap. My dress tangled around my legs. And then finally, I hit the bottom. Everything went white with pain. I lay there, my body twisted at wrong angles, staring up at the soaring ceiling. My dress had ripped, white silk stained with blood from a gash on my temple. My left ankle throbbed with a pain so intense I thought I might vomit. But worse than the physical agony was the sight of Michael standing at the top of the stairs, not rushing down to help me, not calling for an ambulance, just standing there, frozen, his hands still extended from the push. And beside him, Patricia, her face not showing horror or concern, but something else entirely, calculation, like she was already working out how to spin this, how to make it my fault, how to use even this disaster to her advantage. That image burned itself into my brain. My fiancé and his mother, standing above me while I lay broken at the bottom of the stairs, they'd pushed me down. Not metaphorically this time, literally. Rachel reached me first, dropping to her knees beside me. "Don't move," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone call 911. "Oh my God, Sarah, don't move." But I did move. I turned my head, ignoring the spike of pain, and looked straight up at Michael. "I saw you," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You pushed me. You tried to kill me." The venue erupted in chaos. The next hours were a blur of paramedics and police and hospital bright lights. My ankle was shattered, would require surgery and months of physical therapy. I had a severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and more bruises than the doctors could count. But I was alive. And more importantly, I was conscious enough to give a statement to the police before they sedated me for surgery. I told them everything. About the forged documents, about the attempted theft, about the confrontation at the wedding, about Michael grabbing me, pulling me back, shoving me down the stairs, and it was all captured on video. The venue had security cameras covering the staircase. The footage showed everything. Michael lunging after me, grabbing my arm, pulling me backwards, me stumbling, his hands shoving against my back, my body tumbling down the stairs. The police arrested him right there at the venue, still in his tuxedo. Arrested Patricia, too, though she tried to run, claiming she had nothing to do with it. The forged documents said otherwise. The charges kept mounting. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft, assault, attempted murder for Michael. The prosecutor was particularly interested in the pattern of behavior, the premeditation involved in the property scheme. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, planned, executed over months, which made the shove down the stairs look less like a momentary loss of control and more like a final, desperate attempt to silence me permanently. I spent 3 days in the hospital. Rachel never left my side. Neither did my Uncle Thomas, my grandmother's younger brother, who flew in from California the moment he heard. "The brownstone is yours," he told me, holding my hand carefully around all the IV lines. "Eleanor wanted you to have it. She trusted you with it, and she'd be so proud of how you fought to keep it." The media had a field day. Groom shoves bride downstairs at wedding. The headlines screamed. "Property fraud scheme. Exposed in wedding day confrontation. Mother and son arrested for forgery and assault." The video went viral, of course. Millions of views across every platform. People I'd never met had opinions about my dress, my decisions, Michael's character, Patricia's evil mother-in-law persona. It was overwhelming and invasive and weirdly validating. The court of public opinion had already convicted them both. The actual court followed suit, though it took time. Michael pleaded guilty to assault and fraud, taking a deal that gave him 18 months in prison and permanent probation. His law license was revoked, his reputation destroyed. Every mutual friend we'd had distanced themselves from him. He tried to write me letters from jail, apology after apology, claiming he never meant to hurt me, that he was under his mother's influence, that he still loved me. I burned every single one without reading past the first line. Patricia fought the charges, maintaining her innocence right up until the jury came back with a guilty verdict on all counts: forgery, fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy. She got 4 years. The courtroom erupted in applause when the sentence was read, something I'd never heard before outside of TV dramas. Even the judge didn't call for order immediately. He let the moment breathe. Let Patricia understand exactly how many people she'd wronged, how many were celebrating her downfall. I testified at both trials. Walking was still difficult, my ankle held together with pins and determination, but I stood in that witness box and told my story. Told it calmly, factually, with all the evidence laid out. Watched Michael refuse to meet my eyes. Watched Patricia glare at me with pure hatred. Watch the jury believe every word. Justice isn't always satisfying in real life. It doesn't heal the wounds or erase the betrayal. But it helps. It helps to know that they faced consequences, that they didn't get away with it. 18 months after the wedding that never was, I sat on the front steps of the brownstone, my grandmother's brownstone, my brownstone, and watched the sun set over Brooklyn. My ankle ached the way it always did when rain was coming, a permanent reminder of that day. But I was walking, dancing even, though I'd never quite trust my balance on stairs the same way again. The house had become something different to me over those months, not just a property to protect, but a sanctuary to reclaim. I'd redecorated, painted walls, replaced furniture. Every room that held memories of Michael, I'd transformed. The home office where I'd found those documents was now my art studio. The bedroom we'd shared was now just mine, with new sheets and new memories. Rachel helped me plant a garden in the backyard, something my grandmother had always wanted but never had time for. We filled it with roses and herbs and vegetables that grew wild and beautiful. I'd gone back to work at my grandmother's foundation, throwing myself into the nonprofit work I'd always loved. We'd expanded our youth programs, doubled our scholarship offerings. I'd even started a legal fund specifically for people fighting property fraud, helping others who'd been targeted the way I had been. My physical therapist became a friend. My lawyer became a mentor. I built a life that had nothing to do with Michael or Patricia or the future I'd thought I wanted. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I healed. Not completely. I still had nightmares sometimes, dreams where I was falling down endless staircases, where Michael's face loomed above me with that cold calculation. I still flinched when someone grabbed my arm unexpectedly. I still got anxious at the top of stairs. Trauma leaves marks that don't show up on X-rays, but I was whole again. Different than before, but whole. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel asking if I wanted to grab dinner. A text from Uncle Thomas sharing a photo of my grandmother from decades ago. A text from my new friend, Jenna, the woman I'd met at a coffee shop 3 months ago who knew nothing about my past and liked me for exactly who I was now. I had a life. A real one, built on truth instead of lies, protected by my own strength instead of someone else's promises. The brownstone stood solid behind me, every brick a testament to my grandmother's love and my own resilience. Michael got out of prison last month. I heard through mutual acquaintances, people who still thought I'd want updates. He was living with a cousin somewhere in New Jersey, working as a paralegal since his law license was gone. He'd asked about me, apparently, whether I'd ever consider talking to him. I'd laughed when I heard that. Not a bitter laugh, just genuinely amused at the audacity. What could he possibly have to say that I'd want to hear? What apology could possibly be adequate for the systematic betrayal, the violence, the calculated cruelty? Patricia still had 2 years left on her sentence. I hoped she spent every day of it regretting her choices. The sun had fully set now, the streetlights flickering on along the brownstone-lined block, my neighborhood, my home, my life. I stood up, my ankle protesting slightly but holding, walked back inside and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow I had a foundation board meeting. Next week, a dinner party with friends. Next month, maybe a vacation. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but mine, all mine. No one could take that away. They'd tried. They'd schemed and lied and forged documents and literally pushed me downstairs trying to take what was mine. And they'd failed. I'd survived. More than survived. I'd won. And every day I lived in this house, every decision I made about my own life, every moment of peace and joy and hard-won happiness, it was all victory. The wedding day that should have been the beginning of my marriage became instead the end of my naivety. The moment I learned exactly who I was and what I was capable of. My fiancé pushed me down the stairs at our wedding, trying to silence me, trying to destroy me. Instead, he ruined his own life. And I built mine, stronger than ever, on the ruins of his schemes. Some stories don't have neat endings. This one doesn't. There's no reconciliation, no dramatic forgiveness, no lesson about the power of love conquering all. There's just survival, justice, rebuilding, and the quiet knowledge that I am enough all by myself to protect what matters. The brownstone's old radiators clanked to life as the evening grew cold. I made myself tea in my grandmother's favorite mug, sat in her chair with a book I'd been meaning to read, and lived my life, my beautiful, hard-won, completely mine life. And that was more than enough.